Hello, everyone, and hope you're doing great this wonderful first Tuesday of March 4, 2025. Have you been? How's your week been? And how has your month of March been? Welcome to the third working month of the first quarter of 2025. Wow, in just about 4 weeks, it will be the end of the month, but also the end of the first quarter. And that's a very important thing to note, even as we continue on the theme of monitoring and evaluation, which we began on this program last week. My name is Tolu Omadara, and I welcome you very warmly to developing national innovation systems for absorptive capacity on ambulatory communications, episode 9. Wow, just like that. Like I was saying, monitoring and evaluation is a theme that we began to look at last week. Right, and last week the topic was understanding innovation drivers within economies, the monitoring and evaluation imperative. I repeat, understanding innovation drivers within economies, the monitoring and innovation imperative. Right, last week we made a couple of points which I would be highlighting the critical ones amongst shortly. However, let me say that today's topic, following from last week's, is measuring the innovation drivers within an economy, the Portugal example. I repeat, today's topic would be measuring the innovation drivers within an economy, the Portugal example. So last week, like I said, we're looking at understanding innovation drivers within an economy. We emphasize the monitoring and evaluation imperative. Without monitoring and evaluation, you cannot know if the assumptions upon which you've predicated your innovation systems are accurate or effective, right? Because when you're designing an innovation system, I remember saying, let's imagine innovation as an innovation, and asking you to permit my tautology. Because when you're designing an innovation system, you are creating what has not existed before, right? You are making certain assumptions, you're hypothesizing that this would work. It's an hypothesis, right? And you're going to pilot it, you're going to test it. And after piloting and testing, you definitely need to monitor and evaluate to ensure that the assumptions are accurate or the assumptions are effective, right? The assumptions will be accurate, but not necessarily effective, especially given the uniqueness of your context. So it is extremely important to, measure and evaluate so that you can know if the assumptions upon which you have predicated your innovation system as a nation are accurate and effective. That's one. Now, even if those assumptions are accurate, because a national innovation system is a system comprising of several interconnected parts, right? You also need to know which element of the system is contributing most significantly to your national innovation output, outcomes, and impact. I repeat, in addition to knowing if the general innovation system you have created is accurate, right? You also need to know which specific element of the system, right, is contributing most significantly to your national innovation output, outcomes, and impact. The reason is because if you do not do this, you might be distributing resources evenly without distributing them effectively. Even distribution of resources might not be equal to effective distribution of resources, right? To distribute resources effectively, right, to invest effectively in your national innovation systems is to differentiate investment. Honestly, there are certain things you may need to invest more in and certain things you may need to invest less in. And there are certain things you may even need to to discontinue investing in it completely. And there are certain things you may need to introduce, into the investment framework of your national innovation system. All of this you will only know if you are monitoring and evaluating, so that you know what is working optimally, what is working suboptimally, and what is not working at all. Very, very important, right? So without monitoring and evaluation, you cannot know if the assumptions upon which you've predicated your national innovation system are accurate and which element of the system is contributing most significantly to your national innovation outputs, outcomes, and impacts, right? Last week we highlighted the nation we are looking more deeply into today, that's Portugal, and we said that Portugal recognized that a national innovation system is a cornerstone for a country's development and international competitiveness. That's one thing we've kept saying. Without an effective national innovation system, you will be playing catch up as a nation. I repeat, without an effective national innovation system, you will simply be playing catch up as a nation. Other nations will create and you'll be reacting. They would develop templates, and once those templates are established in the market goes along with the template, and you will have to conform to the template. But if you are proactive with innovation, you will stand the chance of creating, right? You will stand the chance of determining, even if some templates have been established, you will have the opportunity to recreate those templates in a manner that favors you. Some weeks ago, we saw what, for instance, DeepSeek did. Artificial intelligence had been created on a model of some level of luxury, right? Artificial intelligence products, artificial intelligence services, artificial intelligence apps, and so on and so forth, were predicated upon an assumption that they would be expensive. And DeepSeek came from China to sort of disrupt that model, and they disrupted it quite significantly, right? An organization like Nvidia, which is based on that model of cost optimization. I don't want to say cost optimization. I would say full cost exploitation. In other words, which was based upon the assumption that they would price this AI products as expensive. AI, then being artificial intelligence. For those who may not know, that they would price these artificial intelligence products as expensively as possible. Took a serious tumble. Their stocks, their valuation, and a lot of things affected them significantly when DeepSeek in China decided to remake artificial intelligence on the template of cost efficiency, that it was possible to produce it at a significantly reduced cost, and the market responded. So when you are in the driver's seat of innovation in your nation, like I said, you will not just be reacting, you will be creating, and even where other templates have been created, you will have an opportunity as a nation to recreate those existing templates to your own strategic advantage. Extremely important. But all of that becomes possible and becomes enabled when, like I said, you recognize, like Portugal, that national innovation system is a cornerstone for a country's development and international competitiveness. This has been the whole thrust, the whole theme, the emphasis of this program from the beginning in January all the way to today in March, right? Last week we also said that Portugal does not just know that the national innovation system is a cornerstone for their development and international competitiveness, but they also identify the importance of measuring the effectiveness of their innovation actions, right? Like we've been saying since last week. And then they decided to engage an existing innovation evaluation framework. And then they decided to, sort of deploy this and compare themselves based on that framework. And that framework, like we said last week, is the GII, the Global Innovation Index, right? Which creates an input-output comparison that consists of input and output sub-indices and an innovation efficiency index. I repeat that very quickly. So this Global Innovation Index, like we said last week, consists or is predicated on an input and output comparison, right? In other words, you look at what you have been investing, that's the input, and you compare it with what you are getting from what you are investing, right? It's like a simple cost-benefit analysis, right? So this GII, the Global Innovation Index, creates an input and output comparison, which consists of the input sub-indices as well as the output sub-indices, and then an innovation efficiency index. The input sub-indices are 5 and the output sub-indices are 2. So the input index is what you invest in your innovation system, which is supposed to enable innovation. Now the output sub-indices of this GII, this Global Innovation Index, are supposed to be what you get from those investments, right? And then Innovation Efficiency Index does a comparison between your investment, which are the inputs, and what you are getting from those investments, the returns on those investments, the ROI, which are the output. And that way, it gives an innovation efficiency indicator. In other words, how efficient have your innovation investments been? Extremely important. So more things quickly from what we discussed last week, and then we go into an examination of Portugal. If your market is not sophisticated enough to attain a level of scale, you may invest in creativity, but you may not have optimum innovation outcomes. This was one of the things we said last week, especially based on the fourth input index of the Global Innovation Index. Now, this fourth input index is the market sophistication index, right? The market sophistication index. And this market sophistication index has a sub-index. I'm not going to go into all the sub-indices now. You can, I may speak to them later, and you can also go to last week's program on Amogate's YouTube page. Look at DNIS FIAC, Developing National Innovation Systems for Absorptive Capacity, episode 8. I spoke extensively about the inputs and outputs indices last week. But this fourth input index, the market sophistication, has three sub-indices, which are credit, investment, and of course trade, competition, and market scale. And I emphasize the need for us to develop scale. Extremely important for you to develop scale as a nation, especially because of your sunk costs. Certain innovation costs are sunk. They are sunk there, meaning they are fixed costs, right? And no matter the level of optimality, the costs are fixed already. So it is up to you to develop scale, and that way your market can gain the most. I give an example of a house. If you have a house that can accommodate 10 guests, right, there is a fixed rental cost or mortgage cost every month, for instance. So if you optimize it by engaging or ensuring that you attract as many as 10 guests, you optimize those sunk costs. But if you have only 2 or 3 guests, you may not have maximum innovation outputs because you are not operating at scale, at the maximum level of scale or at an optimal level of scale. So it's important for us to scale, to grow our market, especially to optimize our sunk costs. So if your market is not sophisticated enough to attain a level of scale, you may invest in creativity, but you may not have optimal innovation outcomes, right? And that's why we have kept emphasizing on this program that innovation is a whole cycle, all the way from conceptualization to commercialization. We said it last week and we are repeating it today. A nation that only has creativity but is not thinking from the conceptualization part of creativity to the commercialization part of innovation is one that has not understood the market sophistication imperative of innovation. Extremely important to start thinking of this, right? So while innovation inputs are more strongly correlated with innovation, which innovation inputs are more strongly correlated with innovation outputs in your economy is another thing that a monetary evaluation framework like GII helps you do, because you need to know which of these innovation outputs, like we hinted, are delivering the bulk of those innovation outcomes and impact, and that way you can differentiate investment of resources rather than just investing evenly, for instance, or even in a differentiated manner. You may be differentiating, you may not even be distributing your resources evenly, you're distributing them in a differentiated manner, but you may be overemphasizing certain aspects of the inputs that are not necessarily correlated with the higher output. In other words, you may be investing in certain parts of the innovation system that are not responsible for the maximum part of your innovation output. So it's important to evaluate, and that way you can know which of the innovation inputs are delivering the majority of your innovation output, and that way you can focus resources appropriately on the key drivers of innovation within your system. My name again is Tolo Modera. This is Developing National Innovation Systems for Absorptive Capacity, episode 9. It's a joy, it's a delight, it's a pleasure, it's a privilege to be welcoming you on this beautiful first Tuesday of March 2025, right? Again, I want to encourage you to take some time to begin to evaluate your year, especially your quarter one, or to begin to ask yourself what are the frameworks that I'm going to evaluate my quarter thus far by, because before you know it, it's the end of quarter one and the end of quarter two, and so on and so forth, and then it's December 31 already. Well, let us go on to the thrust of today's program. Like I said, today's program is focusing more on Portugal. We began to highlight Portugal last week, but now we want to look at what Portugal has done, right, in adopting this this global innovation index. What did Portugal see? What did those who are measuring Portugal see about themselves, and then what are the lessons they drew, and how can other nations listening to this learn from that, right? So this is again, today's episode is now looking more at measuring, right? Measuring the innovation drivers within an economy, and we are looking at the Portugal example. So, like I said, Portugal adopted the Global Innovation Index, which consists of the input sub-index as well as the output sub-index, and then they also measured the innovation efficiency. One thing I want us to note is that this study, like we said last week, is a longitudinal study. And the advantage of a longitudinal study is that it allows you to study certain factors over a given period. That way you have a more comprehensive and holistic perspective rather than just looking at one static view. A static view, for instance, is when you just take a particular a moment in time. That's like a cross-sectional study. You can look at several indices, like all of these 5 input indices and the 2 output indices of the Global Innovation Index. But if you take it over just one period, what you simply have is like a cross-sectional study, right? So this cross-sectional perspectives gives a static picture of the relationships between all these national innovation indices in a given moment. It's a static picture because all you can see is just the given moment. That may not really help. For you to get a more comprehensive picture, you are going to need to take a longitudinal perspective, right? So what the longitudinal perspective does is that it carries out a comparison, not just between, let's say, 2 consecutive years, but as much as possible over a given period, right? The study what Portugal did that we are looking at today was done from 2013 to 2018, right? So they took a longitudinal view of about 6 years, right? Taking those indices, but measuring them over a sufficiently long period to draw much more informed policy insight. Extremely important, and then based on that they could make innovation policy adjustments, recommendations, and take necessary actions. So I want to emphasize that what we are looking at is a longitudinal study. Very, very important. Longitudinal meaning you're looking at several indices, but you're looking at them over a given period of time, right? Not just taking a static picture, which is like a cross-sectional perspective, because yes, it looks at several it takes several indices into consideration, but it's taking it only over a static period. Very, very important. So let's come back to what Portugal did with the GII. Like I said, they took their data from 2013 to 2018, which I think is very notable. That's a 6-year comparison, right? And they also did 3 levels of comparison, which I like, right? Remember today's program, the topic for today is measuring the innovation drivers within an economy, the Portugal example. So Portugal did 3 things, in my opinion, based on this study that I think it's important for us to do as nations. 1, they compared themselves with themselves. And that's the advantage of a longitudinal study. Right? When you do a study over a given period, you can look at yourself and compare yourself with yourself. Where were they in 2013 versus where they were in 2014 versus where they were in 2015 all the way to 2018. So they could compare themselves with themselves across these indices, right? That's the output, the input indices, the innovation input indices, then the innovation output indices, as well as the innovation efficiency index, which compares, which does a cost-benefit analysis of the innovation input versus what they have gained, right? The results on those, the returns on those innovation investments to give an innovation efficiency indicator. Extremely important. So remember, the first thing they did is they compared themselves with themselves, right? They compared themselves with themselves over this period, over this 6-year period of 2013 to 2018. Number 2, they compared themselves with their peers, right? And I think that the importance of comparing yourself with yourself is that it helps you take a more thorough evaluation. And I'll explain what I mean by that. Measuring is important because it helps you know where you are, but evaluation is deeper than measuring, right? Evaluation is now beginning to say what happened here, and that's why today monitoring evaluation has actually gone beyond M&E to what is called monitoring evaluation accountability and learning, right? And some even say MEL these days. Monitoring evaluation accountability and learning, that's MEL, and some even say MEL these days. Monitoring evaluation results and learning. Because accountability is not just about holding people accountable or holding institutions accountable or holding national leaders accountable or policy leaders accountable, but it's also about results, right? Whether you want to call it meal or you want to call it mail, one thing is important, right? The evaluation parts of it helps you to do a little more thorough analysis. What happened here? What are the deeper factors here? What are the underlying issues here? What are the insights to be gleaned from this? And that's what happens when you evaluate yourself with your peers. So before you begin to make excuses and say, oh, but everyone, before you begin to say, oh, I couldn't achieve this, you say, no, let me compare myself with nations that have comparative level of GDP, right? That was what they did. They compared themselves with their peers. And number 3, they now compared themselves with leaders in the Eurozone. All of this was in the Eurozone. They compared themselves with their peers in the Eurozone, looked at the average score on all of those indices in the Eurozone from 2013 to 2018, they now also compared themselves against the top 3 performers in the Eurozone. Extremely important, because you are not supposed to be targeting where you are, then it's not a target, right? It's not a strategic goal. If you have achieved it already, you're supposed to be targeting where you ought to be. And so I like the third part of what they did. They did not just compare themselves with themselves and themselves with their peers, right? They then compared themselves with the leaders, the top 3 performers in the Eurozone. And that way, it helps them to set ambitious, like my colleague Abiodun Abari would like to say, it helps them to set ambitious goals because they're comparing themselves with the top 3 players in the Eurozone. Extremely important. Now let's go into a bit of the details, right? From 2013 to 2018, like I said, they looked at themselves across these indices, the input sub-index and the output sub-index, and that was beautiful. So in 2013, for instance, Portugal had a score of 39.83 in the input sub-index of the Global Innovation Index, right? They had a score of 39.83, but across the Eurozone, the average score was 42.28 in 2013. That's the average, comparing themselves with their peers, not even the leaders. So Portugal was performing lower generally in the input index in 2013 than the Eurozone. And then the Eurozone's top 3, of course, had a score of 48.46. So when you compare Portugal with the Eurozone in 2013, they were at minus 5.8% compared with the Eurozone, compared with their peers, and then compared with the top 3, they were at 17.8%, which was significantly more, right? So if they want to at least match up with their peers, as far as the input index was concerned, then they had to close a 5.8% gap. And if they wanted to then match up with the leaders, the top 3 in the Eurozone, they had the 17.8% gap to close in the input index generally. Now, in that same 2013, Portugal's output sub-index was 35.35. right, while that of the Eurozone was 37.83, again higher. So Portugal was performing poorly compared to the average in the Eurozone in terms of output, which is not surprising because their input was also lower, right? But if you then look at Portugal in terms of percentage, of course the top 3 were 43.39. That was one thing I liked about this. The top 3 were consistently higher than the average, which makes them the top 3, and that is where you have to continue to set ambitious goals as a nation, ambitious innovation goals. If you are really going to lead, if you are really going to create or recreate templates, you cannot be average. The top 3 leaders in the Eurozone were at 43.39 in terms of the output index in 2013, and so the gap between Portugal in 2013 in terms of the output sub-index and the average was minus 6.6, which is significant on itself, and the gap between Portugal and the top 3 was even much higher, triple that of the gap between Portugal and the Eurozone at 18.5%. The gap between Portugal and the top 3 in terms of the output sub-index was a whooping, if you ask me, 18.51%. But let's look at what happened in 2014, right? In 2014, thankfully, Portugal moved from 39.83 to 40.76, which you may say is not significantly high, but at least they made a progress. That's in terms of their input sub-index. And then, of course, the Eurozone kind of slid slightly from 42.28 to 42.24. But the Euro's top 3, right? The top 3 in terms of innovation inputs, according to this GI index in the Eurozone, moved from 48.46 to 48.68. So they improved, even though slightly, but they did not go down. They improved, right? Then if you look at the output sub-index in 2014, Portugal actually slid, which is, if I were Portugal, I'll be a bit concerned. They slid from 35.35 to 34.30. So even though their inputs increased, their output was still on the decrease, right? Now, they also compared themselves with the Eurozone. Interestingly, the Eurozone's output in 2014 also slid from 37.83 in 2013 to 36.24 in 2014. And in a way, Unfortunately for Portugal and the Eurozone, even the top three had their output sub-index also slide down from 43.39 to 42.41. And this is what a comparison does for you, right? So in this case, you can see that there was a general decline in output in the Eurozone area, innovation output in the Eurozone area in 2014. By 2015, the data shows that Portugal had a 42.13 score in their input sub-index in 2015, while the Eurozone had a 42.72 increase, right? A 42.72 score, beg your pardon. So, as at this point, you can see that the average score of the Eurozone is still higher. Portugal was still lagging by minus 1.5%, but they were beginning to catch up, because in 2013, they were lagging in input sub-index by 5.8%, but by 2014, they were lagging by only 3.5% compared to 5.8% in 2013. Then by 2015, they had closed the gap further. This is what monitoring does for you. So whatever policy, innovation policy, strategies that they had seem to be working in terms of closing the gap. So they had closed the gap from 5.8% between them and the average Eurozone in 2013 to minus 3.5% in 2014, and by 2015 they had closed the gap further to minus 1.4%, right? And ditto for the gap between Portugal and the top three in the input sub-index. The gap between Portugal and the top three in Euro was 17.8% in terms of input sub-index, while the gap between Portugal and the top three had slipped to 16.3% in 2014 and further slid to 14.0% in 2015, right, as far as the input sub-index was concerned. Now, in the output sub-index, right, in 2015, Portugal had actually grown from 34.3 score to 36.27 score. And I think that again was remarkable, right? They seem to have grown in 2015. Then in the same 2015, the average score for the Eurozone in terms of the input, in terms of the output sub-index, the average score was actually 36.87%. So the Eurozone was still higher than Portugal, and the top three in the Eurozone were at 43.95%. Now, what does this, 43.95 score? What does this mean in terms of scores? Again, in terms of differentials in score in percentage terms, again, Portugal was minus 1.6% away from the average Eurozone performance. Initially in outputs, they were at minus 6.6% in 2013, minus 5.4% in 2014, but in 2015, they were now at minus 1.6% in comparison with the average Eurozone. And similarly, in comparison to the top three performers in Eurozone, Portugal was at minus 18.5% in output in 2013, and it worsened in 2014 to minus 19.1%, but by 2015 it had improved to about 17.5%. Now, something gives me a bit of concern. By 2016, right, this gap that seemed to have been closing between them and their peers, I'll give you what the statistics were, and if I were Portugal, I'll be saying, what did we do? What did we shift? What did we change between 2015 and 2016? Because by 2016, the input index score of Portugal was 41.23, while that of the Eurozone was 42.7, and while that of the top three performers in the Eurozone was 48.35. Now, what does that mean in terms of percentage differential? So the percentage that seemed to have been narrowing from 2013 to 14 to 15 percentage gap now suddenly increased. The percentage gap between Portugal and the average Eurozone country was now at minus 3.4%, so it had doubled from 2015 to 2016. In 2015, they had closed the percentage gap in terms of the input index between them and other Eurozone countries from 1.5% minus 1.5 right? They had closed it from 3.5% in 2014 to minus 1.4% in 2014. But by 2016, that gap had more than doubled to 3.4%. And the percentage gap that they had brought down in input index to 14.4%, and they had been decreasing consistently from 2013 to 2015, now increased again. That's the percentage gap between them and the top 3 performers in the Eurozone. It was now minus, by 2016, it was 15.4, minus 15.4 between them and the top 3 performers, instead of minus 14.0 in 2015. Right, and then if you also look at their output index in 2016, their output index score was 34, while that of the Eurozone, the average Eurozone, was 36.5, and the top 3 performers was 43.6. Again, the gap that they had been closing in terms of their output index from 2014 to 2015 increased, right? But the gap between them and the average Eurozone area or country that was minus 1.6% in 2015 had now increased to minus 5.7%, right, in 2016. And also the gap between them and the top 3 performers in Eurozone had also increased to 21.7%, which was even significantly higher than that of 2013 when they started closing the gap. Like I said, I will be asking questions at this point that what did we do in 2016 that led to this reversal of recovery, so to say, right? By 2017, the 5th year in this longitudinal study, Portugal had a score of 41.23%, beg your pardon, in the input sub-index, while that of the average Eurozone was 42.7, which was higher again by Portugal, right? Then in 2017, Portugal had a score of 41.61, which was higher than their score in 2016. Then the Eurozone also increased, because the Eurozone score in 2016 was 42.7, but their score in 2017 was 43.45, right? Then in the top 3 performers also improved from 48.55 in 2016 to 49.07 in 2018, right? But in terms of the gap, unfortunately, the gap further widened. The gap between Portugal and the rest of the average Eurozone that was minus 3.4% in 2016 further widened to minus 4.2% in 2017. But the gap between Portugal and the top 3 performers reduced slightly from 15.4% to minus 15.4% to minus 15.27% in terms of the innovation input sub-index. Then let's look at the sub-index of the outputs, right? The 2016 score for Portugal was 34, while that of Portugal for 2017 was now at 33.75, right? Then the Eurozone was 35.02 in terms of their output index in 2017, which decreased from 2016. And interestingly, the output score for even the top 3 performers in the Eurozone area also decreased in 2017 from 43.06 in 2016 to 42.12 in 2017. So generally, the Eurozone seemed to decline in terms of their innovation output, and from a policy point of view, this is something that the EU body should be looking at and saying, what did we do between 2016 and 2017? Either what we did do or what we did not do, because sometimes it's also not them, it's what's happening on the global scale that they may not be catching up pretty fast with, right? Then finally, in terms of the lag, I think in 2017, Portugal now seem to close the gap slightly in terms of their innovation output. The decrease between them and the average Eurozone area went lower from 5.7% in 2016 to 3.6% to minus 3.6% in 2017, and the decrease or the gap between them and the top 3 performers in Europe also went down from 21.7% to 19.9% in terms of the output, right? And finally, in 2018, the Portugal scored 39.63 in the input sub-index. The Eurozone scored 41.66. Again, both Portugal and the Eurozone declined in 2018, and further, and even the top three performance in the Eurozone also declined in 2017 to 2018. They had 49.07, the top three performers in 2017, but now 47.18 in 2018 in terms of the input sub-index. In terms of the gap between Portugal and the Eurozone area, in 2017 it was minus 4.2%, but it had worsened in 2018. It was now minus 4.9% in terms of input sub-index, and the gap between Portugal and the top three performers in Euro also widened from 15.9% in 2017 to 15.9% in 2018. In the output sub-index, Portugal scored 33.88 in 2018, which was slightly above 33.75 in 2017. Portugal also scored 35 points. The Eurozone, other Eurozone nations, beg your pardon, also scored 35.04 in 2018, which was slightly above their 35.02 score in 2017. Similarly, in terms of the output sub-index, the top three performers in Euro scored 42.82 in 2018, which was again above what they scored in 2017. So the Eurozone generally seemed to be recovering, right, from the decline they had between 2016 and 2017, right? Again, they need to know what they did well or what they did not do, either what they started or what they discontinued to lead to this improvement, right? And of course, the gap between Portugal and the Eurozone area also declined from 3.6% in 2017 to 3.3% in 2018. However, the gap between Portugal and the top three performers in Euro further widened from 19.9% in 2017 to 20.9%, which is a whole 1 percentage point in 2018. Wow. So we've looked at Portugal. We've looked at how Portugal compared itself, first of all, with itself from year to year over a longitudinal study. We've looked at how Portugal compared itself with its peers in the Eurozone, and how Portugal compared itself with the top three performers in the Eurozone in the input sub-index, in the output sub-index, in specific scores, and also in terms of the gap. This is the kind of thing we need to do as nations. If you have such a framework already, strengthen it, examine it. If you do not have such a framework, you need to establish it. Where are we in terms of comparing ourselves with ourselves? Where are we when we compare ourselves with peer nations which have similar capabilities, which have similar populations, which have similar GDPs, which have similar resources, and so on and so forth? And where are we relative to the top performers where we want to aspire to, or whom we want to aspire to be like, right, in terms of their scores? What are the gaps? Of course, they did further analysis. We don't have the time to go into that, but today we were talking about understanding innovation. Last week we were looking at understanding innovation drivers within an economy, the monetary and evaluation imperative, and today we have looked a bit more specifically at measuring those innovation drivers, right? These input indexes, these input sub-indices, like we said last week, are like the innovation drivers, right? They were categorized into 5: the institutions, the human capital and research, the infrastructure, the market sophistication, and the business sophistication. We went into them last week, and the output index consists of the knowledge and technology output as well as the creative output, right? And of course, the innovation efficiency index is comparing the input with the output. All of this analysis Portugal did, and that way they were able to make more informed policy decisions. And these are the kind of analysis the framework we need to have. You can look at existing frameworks, create what works for you, adapt existing ones if you feel that would work. But there must be a monitoring and evaluation framework for you to look at your inputs, your innovation inputs, measure based on your innovation output, and not just compare with yourself, yourself with yourself over a given period, a longitudinal study, but also compare yourself with your peers, see how what they're doing, look at the percentage, look at whether you are closing the gap from year to year or whether the gap is widening from year to year, what happened in the years where the gap was narrowing, what happened in the years where the gap was expanding, right? What also happens with the years where you were improving compared with yourself, and what happens in the years where you appear to have declined? This is how you monitor. This is how you evaluate. You monitor and then you evaluate. What does not get measured does not improve. I repeat, what does not get measured does not improve. I know today may have sounded like a lot, but I think it's important to have taken an example of a nation, how a nation examined, and there's so much more to cover, right? But this is where we are going to cap it for today. You see, there is that need to create that framework, and of course, we at Amogate, we are very passionate about creating frameworks, not just for for nations, but also for institutions and organizations. You can engage us. This is our strength. Policy and strategy creation frameworks is our strength. We have done this for national organizations, for supranational organizations, for institutions, the public sector, and the private sector, and the non-profit sector. We are passionate about this, and trust me, we are also very competent in this, right? Let's help you build innovation frameworks, not just for ensuring that you are that you have a strong national innovation system, but also the monitoring and evaluation framework for your national innovation system to ensure that you're monitoring and evaluating what you're doing, to see whether it is working, to see whether you're consistently improving, and to see what factors may be most responsible for your improvement or your declines in the years where they might be. Well, this is where we do the cutting on today's edition of the program. I hope you have enjoyed doing this with us, like I have enjoyed doing this with you. My name remains Tolu Obadaya. This has been episode 9 of Developing National Innovation Systems for Absorptive Capacity. We'll be back same time, same station next week by God's grace. Until then, have a wonderful month of March and start evaluating. Remember, what does not get measured does not improve. Please join us on the rest of the week. My colleagues will be here with fantastic episodes of their programs. We're here Monday through Friday, and please follow us on YouTube. You will see our program. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. That way you get notified when we come live, and you also get notified when programs are uploaded. Like I said, you can reach us at contact@theamogate.org, and you can also check our website. You can send us a form, fill the form, we'll revert to you. Let's help you build. We are good at what we do by God's grace. Thank you very much again, and see you same time, same station next week. Until then, think evaluation. What does not get measured does not improve. Thank you.